Thank you, Amy and Christine. And Christine's going to run most of this. Christine's with me at GGLO. So I'm Mark Sindella, principal at GGLO. I've worked with many of you on the call, and we're honored and recognize the importance of taking the torch on this important project for the city and downtown and moving it forward. So we're excited to do that. The rest of our team, so we have GGLO for design management and landscape architecture. We're pretty happy to have HDR on our team. They know Boise and Boise streets pretty well. Musgrove, who many of you know, for electrical, and then we brought on DCW and Trish for cost estimating, as we recognize budget's important, and that's a volatile thing these days. So we really like to stay on top of that from the beginning and make sure we can back up the promises that we're making to you all in a process like this. And a couple of things. So this is a pretty important project, and we're earning your trust here. And why GGLO? So we have offices in Boise, Seattle, and LA. We've been working in Boise for about 15 years now and done projects that you probably recognize: Boise City Hall Plaza. The latest is Sherry Buckner Webb Park with some partners with Jensen Belts, among many others, Rhodes Park and other work for CCDC. We are actually in the Lottery Building in the Shoreline District, and we're excited that we're moving into a new office that we designed that just broke ground in April in Old Boise. Our work in general across the spectrum of our offices is focused on urban livability and connecting people through beauty and innovation, specifically in cities across the West. And of course, livability is a big deal in Boise. Our approach to this and all of our work here is to bring lessons learned from 35 years of experience on the West Coast to our projects, and to do so with Boise and Treasure Valley sensibilities. There's really a right way and a wrong way to do that. And our goal, and this is really important, is to perpetuate, not dilute, Boise's history, culture, and identity and stature of one of the most livable cities in the country. And with all the growth that we're having, that's a very precious thing that we all need to be keen on and moving forward. So with that, we'll jump back to Christine, and we're going to get into the details of this one.
Great, thank you. So just to give you guys a heads up, we will be running through, let me see if I can forward, here we go. So we're going to be running through our site analysis for you guys to say. So we're going to start off with visioning transition. So what we heard from all of the visioning work that you've done prior and all the meetings prior. So the key things that we pulled from that, there was a really a lot of information. So we'll go over that briefly. Then we'll look at some case studies that we've been looking at of just great streets and great open spaces in neighborhoods such as the Linden District. And then also getting kind of deep diving into the site analysis and showing what we learned from our site walks a couple of weeks ago, and a couple of the opportunities that came to light during those walks. And then we'll talk about next steps in the design. So really, this is us giving you guys a preview of how we start to think about things. Also giving you it's information session this time around. So I know that you've been pretty active in doing breakout groups previously in your visioning initiatives, but today it's going to be really us sharing information, any sort of information that you would like to give to us. We're going to be kind of content heavy today, so we'd ask you to just type any sort of comments or additional information you'd like us to know in the comment section. At the very end, after we look at the schedule, we can open it up for questions and comments then, just to make sure that we get through all the information in time. But I think we'll have probably about 20 minutes or so to go over any sort of comments or questions that you guys have at the end. So with that, I will just start off here. So you guys had a really in-depth visioning process previous, and we've been reviewing the document that came out. Kind of the things that we keyed in on as we first started were these celebrated assets. So what's working well, and we could totally see this in our site walk when we were out there. So The local support, thank you for everybody that we talked to and everybody that's here today. The unique history and character of the district, also the distinct local businesses. As we walked and we talked to other people in the coffee shops that we went to, and we talked to people that were just walking around, people at Idaho Power that frequent this area for lunch, and everybody had great things to say about the businesses that were there, and also just the length of the time that people have been working in this area and the businesses that have been established. So other things, there are these performance and visual and creative organizations that are within the site that are really helping catapult us into the future. So we're really excited to take a look and leverage all of those assets that you guys have. As you all know, living and working down in that area, there's a lot that needs to be improved. So how do we better use the parking lots? How do we improve the streetscape to make it more hospitable and livable for pedestrians and business owners? How do we bring people to the area? We want this area to be a draw for visitors and residents. We also want to understand and make the parking, vehicular traffic, as well as the bike and pedestrian traffic work better together. So it really brings that downtown feel into this neighborhood. And then obviously getting the stormwater and upgrading the planting along the area. So as we move forward, we also looked at these themes that were brought up during the visioning, and we started to think about how can we translate these themes into the materials and the design moving forward. So a couple of themes that or the themes that were really struck us were this light industry and the housing, transportation corridor, and immigrant working class all kind of verge and merge together. So with light industry, we started thinking about the materials, potentially using metal, brick, dimensional stone, concrete within portions of the neighborhood. Looking at pedestrian scale and gathering, how do we bring this community aspect that was very prominent during the early 19th century or 20th century through flexible open spaces, welcoming pedestrian realm, impromptu gatherings and daily meetups. And looking at the history of the transportation corridor, and we were excited to think about how could we leverage some of the large-scale signs and landmarks that are already there and create these kind of roadside attractions that would be sticky elements as people were driving along Front Street and Main Street in Idaho, and you look down 11th or 16th and you start to catch an eye and it draws people into the neighborhood. And then finally, this entrepreneurial spirit of the immigrants and working class, and we have that here today. So how do we encourage pop-up retail, incubator businesses and markets that will really make this neighborhood exciting and someplace that people, a destination that people want to go to. So as we started looking at the different types of streets that are doing this well across the West, you guys have several streets, particularly 8th Avenue, that we really want to take cues from. So when we looked at all of these case studies, you'll see that we have a list of elements on the right-hand side that are really important to great streets. So the sidewalk pedestrian zone, do we have spill out dining and retail? Is the sidewalk large enough and scaled well enough to encourage pedestrians and pedestrian safety? How much site furnishings, benches, trash receptacles, water fountains, street lights are in there? And then also the parking strip and the walk-off zone within that. There goes the cattail. Then we look at the landscaping, especially important for Boise as we get into the summer months. As we all know, the importance of street trees, softening our concrete urban landscape with understory planting, freestanding planters, and hanging flower baskets. Then we also have the bike facilities. As you all know, probably 11th and Main Street are main bike thoroughfares, and Grove has also been identified as a bike lane designation for the city going from downtown to the west. And so how do we use that to our best potential here? So there are different types of bike facilities that we'll get into later in the design portion next time, but we just identified them here with the Shero, designated bike lanes, raised bike lanes, cycle tracks, and then other elements such as fix-it stations and bike racks. Street parking, storm water, public art, event spaces are all pretty self-explanatory. Looking at also these temporary elements such as parklets or food trucks within the area, and then elements such as specialty pavement, pet amenities, and wayfinding are also all these different layers that create a really livable street. And finally, how do we start to slow traffic and really drive retail and business in this area? And that's with curb bulbs and other traffic calming measures. And then if there are complementary active uses along the side of the street with the businesses, that really slows people down, they get interest and start to look at that. So as you guys all can imagine, 8th Street right now, you guys have a lot of these elements. As we look at a few other streets as case studies, we have a street in Seattle called Bell Street, which has really become a festival street. They have eliminated all curbs. And so it's really a type of street called festival or Wooner, where people and vehicles kind of merge together. It allows breakout events very easily, as well as daily life with bicycles. It's just a very easy, movable street. Now, there are some things in this that work well for our street, maybe not the curbless elements of it all over the place, but there could be some elements that would really help. Another one in Seattle that we took a look at was 7th Avenue. Now, this is running by the Amazon spheres now, and it's a really bustling hub in the Belltown and downtown area. So this raised separated cycle track really allows people to commute back and forth from North Seattle down into downtown. It also encourages pull off and parking your bike to these destination retail spaces along the side. It's a very safe and welcoming area for both bikes and pedestrians, and it gives the vehicles an understanding of where they can drive and where it is safe for bikes to be. Then we also looked at Alberta Street in Portland. Now, this is a really vibrant festival street with a lot of color and historic buildings. They've activated the street with spill out retail as well as a lot of public art. So people come down here for these Instagrammable moments of these murals on the building facades. Also, you can see here a lot of different layers of planting in pots that are spilling out of the retail, as well as the street trees and street planting. We looked at another historic district down in the Pearl district of Portland. And this is an interesting one because they have a lot fewer a smaller right-of-way space here. It's much smaller than what we have in on Grove Street. And so how they started to differentiate right-of-way and the kind of public realm, the sidewalk and pedestrian realm, they started doing some elevated sidewalk areas to really separate and give pedestrians a sense of safety and security. Then we looked at 24th Street in San Francisco. This is very similar to Grove Street. It's a local business district where there are restaurants, retail establishments, residential, and a very lively street. As many of you probably know of San Francisco, their streetscapes are pretty barren, and they usually just have trees in tree grates. But here in 24th Street, they really started to amp up the planting, which was a commitment by the retail and property owners that were adjacent to this planting. So you can see here, one of the things that they have incorporated are these pet rails to keep pets from going and using the planting. So it really retains the lushness of the planting material. And it really gives a sense of these different spaces and outdoor rooms. This is a heavily trafficked street, but you can really sense the scale and kind of the ability to have nice walking and dining experiences, even though this is a really busy street. And then we also looked at Larimer Street in the Lodo district of Denver. And so this street has a similar scale and width of right-of-way. You can see, though, that they have very gracious sidewalks and spill-out dining. And really one of the amazing things that they did to define this area were these outdoor elements that kind of changes over time. So we have festival lights going over the street. We have pedestrian lights along the street there, the kind of the overhead lights. There's planting, there are elements that they change out. You can see here they have the butterfly kites, and then they also at another time had these flags. So it's just kind of this interactive, ever-changing streetscape that people come down to. It's very has a strong identity, and it pulls people from the neighboring streets, especially pedestrians. People want to walk down this street instead of the next street over that doesn't have all of these different layerings of pedestrian amenities. And so when we looked at all of these together, we start to see what are the common themes. So retail spill-out dining was a common element. All these sidewalk furnishings, common elements. And so you can really see what was making these streets livable and really destination spaces. So we will be filling out our matrix here for the West Grove Street as we continue on through design, making sure that we are checking off as many of these as possible to make sure that we have a nice, livable, and welcoming streetscape for pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles. So then we hopped into looking at what are our parameters on this site and what are the opportunities. And so if we, right here in red is our site that we're looking at. And you can see the purple lines are all the bike lanes around downtown and surrounding areas. So you can see that this purple line here goes right through our site. So it's a main bike route through the city. Also, it ties in with all of these cross connectors, especially the new bike lane on 11th that they're going to be building in the in the next year that runs from, the Boise River Greenbelt all the way up to the foothills. So we are also really blessed with having all these surrounding parks. Like Mark said, we just finished and opened the dedication to Cherie Buckner Webb Park. And so we have these two parks on either side that really we can draw people from those elements. And also, as we were talking to Tree Fort and other events that could happen in this area, it really gives us this central core that we could host events here on Grove Street, and then they could have these satellite events happening at other open spaces around us. So when we looked at the circulation and the street types within downtown, Grove Street is identified as a local street. All of these larger, the large purple are main collector streets. And then these smaller purple streets are residential collector streets. So ours is really meant to be a local town center streetscape scale and feel. And we'll go over that a little bit more later when we show you the ACHD's design guidelines for those. So if we kind of dive a little bit more in there, as you guys are well aware, we have a lot of traffic on Main Street. We have a lot of traffic on Front Street. But if you look at kind of the scale of Maine and Idaho and Grove, they all have that same really wide, 80-foot wide streetscape, including the sidewalks. And so how do we differentiate the bustle of Front Street and the main thoroughfare of Main Street? How do we differentiate Grove Street from that? And how do we slow the traffic down as it was intended to be, to allow people to look over at the retail establishments and bring them over to get them to stop, park, and use the retail? Right now, parking is really a premium, and mostly it's because a lot of people park down here and then go and work downtown. So we want to make sure that those parking spots are actually used for the retail establishments as well, and really to allow people to stop and visit our Linden District. So if we zoom in a little bit more and start to look at what the use of all the properties adjacent to Grove Street are, you can see a lot of parking lots. And so as this was the auto row back in 50s and 60s, 70s, you can see that these parking lots really served a purpose. They're not quite serving the same purpose now, or what we would like to see for the Linden District. And so the development has already started, and you can see here in this next slide that these red blocks are what are the parking lots and the parking spaces that are going to be redeveloped in the next couple of years with mixed use residential and retail buildings, hotels, and boutique hotels. So it's really going to start to change the landscape of what Grove Street feels and looks like. So as we dive in, we're going to be looking block to block as to what we identified when we were on the street. And then also we'll look at a cross section of what that looks like, and then the opportunities that we see just at first glance. We'll start looking more deeply as we start to do design, but just wanted to give you guys kind of this first glimpse of our findings. So we're starting at the west end, or the north end, kind of northwest end at 16th. We've identified this as really being kind of the gateway of the district here. And so you see, if we just look at this wide streetscape, we have one lane going north, one lane going south towards downtown, and then a turn lane. And then pretty much all along here, we have this blue bike lane, and then the red dash is public parking, so on-street parallel parking. So you can see that there's a lot going on along the street. And one of the things that was kind of historic of the street are all of these curb cuts. And that made a lot of sense when this was auto row and to get in and out of the parking lots. People really use Grove Street as a main thoroughfare. So now we're going to be looking at how do we try to mitigate some of those parking lots that are existing and that will remain. How do we make it safer for pedestrians and bikes to cross over these driveways? And then how do we encourage more of these spill out retail areas? Atavola is doing an amazing job here, as you guys all know, with their planted buffer, the spill out retail, street trees, with their street lights and bicycle parking, and a really nice wide sidewalk. So this is kind of ideal, is what we would like to see and construct along Grove Street. So and actually you'll see there are a lot of these, if that kind of corner was a gateway, how do we start to enhance that? Because right now we just have these two parking lots at the corner. So if we look at just kind of the scale of this, it's pretty much an 80-foot wide right-of-way, which encompasses typically 11 to 12-foot wide travel lanes. This one happens to also have a turning lane onto 16th. A 5-foot bike lane, which is standard for ACHD's bike lane dimensions, 8-foot parking lane, and then we have usually 10 to 12 feet of pedestrian realm, which can be planting or furnishing zones, sidewalks, spill out retail. Where we cut it right here in front of Eyes on the World, you can also see the opportunity for spill out retail as the building is set back. So we'll be looking at throughout design, what are the elements that we can plug into each one of these zones. We'll be calling them a kit of parts. So we'll look at each one of these zones and how can we enhance each one to make it function better in the Linden District. So as you can see here, the intersection of 16th is ripe with opportunity for some sort of gateway element. And also, if you are standing in the crosswalk looking down, the thing that struck us most was just the scale of Grove Street. 80 feet isn't actually that large, but because of the lack of layering of amenities, it just feels expansive and really overwhelming to the pedestrian. So what we want to do is really designate and differentiate the pedestrian realm with the vehicular traffic realm. And then you can see it also as you approach that intersection from the north. You really can't tell you're entering the Linden District. So we really want to make sure that we highlight that with some sort of gateway feature. Want to enhance these pedestrian crossings, making it safer and more visual for vehicles and safer for pedestrians. Other elements that we identified were street trees, potentially narrowing some of these driveway entrances. We spoke to owner of Eyes of the World property, and we just talked about how can we utilize the front access, maybe one-way directional access, so we can narrow that driveway and then exit out on the alley. We're really fortunate to have alleys on both sides of Grove Street that we could utilize. And then another thing that is really unique to Grove Street are all these iconic signs and the billboard signs that run along there that again are remnants of this auto row and vehicle centric area. So if we go to the next block, we shift down to 15th Street. we start to see kind of the same thing. We have a lot of parking that is butting up against the sidewalk. This block is actually unique in that we have a parking lot with a drive aisle, with a sidewalk, with parking, and then another drive aisle. So you can see a lot of this really valuable developable space is taken up by cars. And so we looked at how can we start to change that a little bit and start to break down this 30 feet of parking and travel aisle here, drive aisle, they're on private property. How can we start to look at that differently and incorporate some of that for open space and amenity space for those retail establishments to draw people in, and potentially shifting that parking over to better consolidate the drive aisles. We also saw that there are, these really beautiful little nooks and crannies along Grove Street, where in this case, it's, a piece of mural art with the Linen District. And some of these have been kind of fenced off and inaccessible. So seeing how we could potentially carve out some of those spaces and work with property owners to create those amenity spill out spaces along Grove. So as we start to look at that, how do we bring in amenity outdoor spill out like they're doing at Big City Coffee along the western side of Grove. So potentially some ideas are having these spill out amenity spaces with a planting buffer, the sidewalk, and then potentially shifting that diagonal parking or additional parking out on the street. So it could be used by the travel lane already. So we can take up some of that travel lane that is being used on the property. Potentially, if the retail establishments and property owners, we will work with them to give them some design ideas for the future. So another thing is carrying on that tradition of these large signs that we see at the corner of 15th and Grove at the LED. And so potentially having additional signage, either historic signs that were identified in the visioning package, and or new signage if retail establishments want to participate in that. So the next block we looked at is 14th and between 14th and 13th. And so this is at the Modern Hotel and Oakley Moody. And so, Oakley Moody, the beloved and long-term retail and service business, is really a unique property because the parking is actually not just parking, it's kind of service oriented. And so how do we celebrate that history of the automobile and the auto row? How do we celebrate vehicles and parking and the service industry in this one location will be really interesting. And how do we start to work with the bike lane that runs through here, and how do we make it safe for bikers and cars to go in and out of these parking lots? As you see, we have one parking lot and we have two other parking lots that are kind of all joined together. So we were looking at, again, that's 48 feet of opportunity. We see it, especially down here at the corner of 13th and Grove, where that parking lot is used during the day and oftentimes not as much in the evening hours after people go home from downtown. So trying to figure out how do we utilize some of these temporary parking elements for event spaces and activate them after hours to bring people from the neighborhood down to this area. What's going well, actually, let me back up one. What's, well, I guess I want to see if I can back up one. There we go. What we found was really successful in this block is the planting and buffer planting that the Modern Hotel had that separated the sidewalk from their parking lot. So you can see here in this image down on the lower right-hand side. So it really gave this area a separation where the pedestrians are feeling comfortable because they have a lane of parking that buffers from the traffic, street trees that give them shade, and then this other planting buffer that is mitigating the parking on the other side. So you're starting to really feel like this is a pedestrian realm and a safe space. And as we look to try to do that across the street in our designs, where you can see the marked difference just on the other side of the street there. The next block is between 13th and 12th Street. This is the block with Idaho Power. And so their parking lot we know is going to remain for the foreseeable future. However, the parking lot to the west is slated for redevelopment. And so the current condition that you see here will change. Some things that we really found interesting and unique about this block is that even though there is this large parking lot adjacent on the east side, they have a pretty deep planting bed that runs between the parking and the sidewalk. And it really gave this passive, quiet feel to this sidewalk. It was really amazing just your perception as you walk through that with having just some plants on the street. So it made it feel very quiet and safe for the pedestrian, even though there was really no retail establishment. So it was almost like a little strip of linear park along this side. So we want to see what we can do in the design to really leverage that and create a space, more of a linear park-like feel along that edge. You can see here, it was probably almost about 8 feet deep of planting. And a pretty wide sidewalk. They did have some trees on this side as well. And you can even see it in this lower, oops, click too quickly. In this lower, it really felt like you can almost see this kind of historic park-like feel with the mature trees and the layered planting and street lights. Really good bones. So what we were looking at there is how can we activate the actual parking, the on-street parking right there. It's not serving any businesses across the street. So are there ways to leverage that, that on-street parking with potentially parklets or food trucks or elements that would really enhance this area and take advantage of that very park-like setting along that side. And as we look at the new development that's coming in down in the future on the west side, what we've gotten a couple of glimpses at their floor plans, and what we've gleaned from those are probably retail establishments on the corner and with a leasing or a lobby in the center. So it's really going to transform this section of Grove with removing all of the curb cuts on that side, making it a very walkable section and much quieter in feel. And of course, as you see, we are always going to be introducing improved sidewalks and intersection crossings. We also identify this as potentially some areas, since we do have the ability with the new development and also the setback of the parking, to potentially have iconic signage added here, either historic signs or new signage or artwork to continue that vocabulary down the street. So the next block between 12th and 11th, we have a really nice scaled pedestrian walking block on the west side with now the new Presbyterian church space pretty much taking up this whole frontage of Grove on the corner, High Tech Color and Salon 117. So all these are really kind of community-based and service-based businesses that we would like to develop a streetscape that encourages spill out and activation of the street along that edge. We also see an opportunity with this small little parking lot and the blank facades along these buildings as potential areas for public art, as seen, kind of down in Freak Alley or elsewhere where artists have been able to do murals on the side of buildings. On the east side is the parking lot for the Wahi Tavern and Hotel. Coming soon is a little boutique hotel on the corner. So this will really transform this space. And as you guys remember, 11th Street is also getting improvements with a new bike lane, street trees, and vehicular traffic lanes. So this is going to be a pretty major thoroughfare. And as we look at kind of what that could mean, continuing that the planting that buffers parking from the streetscape. And also you can see here, taking advantage of the opportunities with these blank facades of the buildings. This section is also in the Downtown Business Association section. Is that correct, Amy? This block?
Yes, the bid ends at 13th.
Yeah, so you can start to see where the site furnishing has really helped, and also the care that the businesses along this streetscape they've gone above and beyond to ensure that the street trees really thrive in these areas. And by above and beyond, I mean they have arborists come out and actually look at them and fertilize them and really care for them. So they saw that as a true amenity, not only to the public, but also to their business. So as we start to take a look at what could that mean with this new development, how can we leverage that to have a dialogue back and forth across the street, adding a lot more street trees that are, similar in character and stature to the ones on the west side, adding more spill out retail, potentially providing more spill out retail or spill out spaces for the church for community events and activation there. And again, what are the elements that we could have that are kind of this iconic signage, either freestanding signs or murals on the side of potentially the new building and existing buildings. We also identified 11th as one of another gateway street, since it is a heavily trafficked and through street cutting across Grove. So while our site limits for this project ends at 10th, we also think 11th is a great kind of gateway feature opportunity there. And then the final block that we have is between 11th and 10th. Safari Inn is going through a remodel, so that is going to be kind of getting on the boards pretty soon, and will transform this corner here. One thing that's extremely unique about this section is that there is no parking along this section of Grove on the east side, primarily because we have a entrance here to a parking lot and driveway entrances into their parking garage below the building, and then a turn lane. So all of this adds up to no parallel parking. So that gives us a huge opportunity to incorporate this 8 feet of space into the pedestrian realm right there. And so to really soften that entrance to the Linden Districts from Grove Plaza. So I think it will be a really great entry into onto Grove Street from this direction. And then again, the parking lot is being redeveloped into a residential building here with retail at the bottom. So taking a look at what that could mean, we look at the cross section. Again, we have this right turn lane where we're cutting it up here, but as you go further south, this right turn lane 8 feet, and then the 8 feet of the sidewalk could become a 16-foot width of sidewalk and pedestrian realm, which is really a boon for this area. And you can see how on 10th, 119 condos has really incorporated a lot of greening. There are opportunities to green not only within the public right-of-way, but also along the building facades. So looking to coordinate with some of the building owners, either existing or the new developments, to really soften any sort of blank facades that we have along Grove Street. And so think about what that could mean. Obviously, adding in street trees. We'll have to keep some of these driveways open, but potentially looking at opportunities for these iconic signages or art pieces and a gateway piece as people are drawn from Grove Plaza down to the Linden District. And then working with the new property owner and developer, and how do we activate these areas into either ground floor retail or lobby spaces for the new building. And then providing bike facilities along both sides, always both sides of the street here.
Hey, Christine, this is Jared Smith with Pembridge. You're aware that that's a hotel, not.
Oh, I'm sorry, a hotel on this side. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, but Jared, that is true that we'll have either a hotel entry, either mid-block or maybe even on the corner.
Correct.
Yep. And then other retail, probably your some sort of restaurant or bar or something like that, that would be activating the ground floor.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
You bet.
So that kind of ends our site analysis. I would like to stop here before we get into the next steps, just to see if, like with Jared, if they had any other comments or questions. We have time, so I think maybe taking about 10 minutes time. If anyone would like to give updates or anything or comments on any of these blocks. Or if there's anything you'd like me to go over.
I did hear from Jeff Dalton that we missed labeling the Legacy US store, which goes between Crazy Neighbor and the liquor store. So we'll make sure we get the graphics updated for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Christine, this is Eric Nelson here. with the safari, I was just going to point out, I think we're still thinking of keeping the entrance where the porte cochere is, so that we'd be able, which
There's
is
another one right here, right?
Yeah, and then possibly closing the one on 11th.
Perfect, thank you. Whoops,
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
not that guy.
This is really exciting, by the way. It's very cool.
Yeah. No problem, man.
Thank you, Eric.
Cool.
Yeah, it is very exciting, especially with all the improvements that all of the property owners
Until we
have
get the
committed
blessing
to
of the-
along
Okay.
here.
Cool. You got it, man.
Oops, I think, Rob, I'm gonna mute you. There you go. Any other comments or anything that you'd like to review on any of the other blocks, anybody? Okay. We'll keep going then. So looking at next steps, what we are going to be doing now, and we're going to be coming back to you in a few weeks once we start looking at what are the design alternatives for all of these blocks. So as we start to approach design, we're looking at the design principles that were established in the visioning plan. So how do we integrate historical uses and forms and cultural storytelling elements to create a distinct place? Ensure that the street is designed for a range of mobility options, including walking, biking, transit, and personal vehicle travel. Activating the area through public and private gathering spaces and programming events. So while the site limits for the improvements from CCDC is only restricted to the right-of-way, as a design team, we're going to be looking at kind of this whole frontage to frontage feel and seeing what are some possible design elements that property owners could pick up and do on their own site. So for example, in front of Eyes on the World, that really deep spill out space next to them, what could that be? Or the corner space at LED, where they have parking and spill out events that we learned about. So how do we incorporate kind of this private property and have complementary activities going on adjacent to the streetscape to really make it a lively public realm? And going along with that is designing a streetscape and public spaces to support and attract an 18-hour environment. We want this street to feel safe and active and a destination for people after work coming from downtown, and also as kind of a regional destination, bringing people down for either evening events or multi-day events such as Tree Fort. And then employ environmentally sustainable design, which of course is a tenet of the city of Boise. And how do we really amp that up? One thing that would like you guys to start to think about is, like 24th Street in San Francisco, that really took over the streetscape and started to use planting, like at-grade planting. But that really required the commitment by adjacent property owners and retail establishments to take care of those areas. So wanted to see in the next meeting, but I want to kind of tee you guys up to see what kind of commitment or excitement we could gauge for elements like that. Boise, especially downtown, or actually all over kind of this area, you either have trees and tree pits or lawn within the right of way. And so really wanted to see, is there something that could distinguish the linden blocks? Is there a multi-layer planting element that that we could incorporate in some blocks that would really enhance that kind of park-like linear element? And that would also support the sustainable design with cooling of our streets and also with stormwater mitigation. So then we're also looking at, that's all kind of the fun visionary elements. We're also working with the old Boise blocks on Grove Street design team down here. We understand that Grove Street is one space, even though it is kind of separated by Grove Plaza. But a lot of pedestrians as well as bikes will be traveling just all the way through. So we want to have a consistency of wayfinding cues, whether that's, you know, planting bike lanes, lights, planting, elements like that, to really connect the two blocks and really have them be sister blocks and sister streets that are kind of married by that Grove Plaza here. So we're working with them. And then, of course, we're working with ACHD to make sure that all of the designs that we will be coming up and presenting to you next time falls within their design guidelines. So this is just considered a local street. We're kind of a hybrid between this town center local and a town center arterial. While we don't have this turn lane in the middle, we do have bicycle lanes. So we're kind of doing a hybrid of those two, looking at, you know, typically there is a 15-foot pedestrian zone that includes 9-foot sidewalk, a 6-foot amenity and planting zone with parking lots and bicycle lanes and travel lanes. So we're going to be looking at how do we configure this to make it feel unique to Grove Street and to function per the ACHD guidelines. So any questions about any of these visioning elements?
Hey, Christine, this is Eric again. Just curious if there's access to this slide deck at the end.
Yes, we can give this to you.
Okay, cool, thank you.
It's kind of big, so maybe we'll have it as a Dropbox link. So
I'm just
then,
gonna add to that, we're finalizing the final vision report, so we haven't forgot about it, and we will get that transmitted over to you guys, anticipating hopefully next week it will get its final reviews done and be ready to share with the group.
yeah, we were able to get a sneak peek at the draft. So you'll see it's a, man, I don't even know, how many pages is that, Amy?
It's only like 20.
Really?
Lots of great graphics, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
21.
21. So there's a lot of really great information that was distilled in that. So this concludes our site analysis, constraint and opportunities phase. This is where we dive in and start really having some fun with this. And so in the next few weeks, up until the next time we come in front of you guys on September 8th, we will be creating some design alternatives. Like I said, this kit apart. So how do we start to plug in these different elements into the streetscape along Grove Street? We also, like Mark had mentioned earlier, are doing a pretty thorough cost analysis. So we have learned that whatever we show to you better be within budget. We don't want you to get excited about something that we can't afford. We often also, it gives us a chance to make kind of these priority decisions. So we'll have that as well for you guys to take a look at. If we only have a certain pot of money, where do you as stakeholders feel like that pot of money is best used. And so we'll have an analysis of that and may have some decisions to be made within that area. We'd love to have your feedback. After we present to you guys and we get your feedback, we incorporate that feedback into the design alternatives. We present to CCDC board, city council, and the ACHD board for their approval the week of September 13th, which is the following week. And then we will then bring it out to the open house, to the public, for a public open house the week of September 20th. So after all of those approvals are made, then we start working on the preferred design based on comments from this group, City Council, CCDC, and ACHD, and then the public. We'll refine our design into the preferred design and update the cost analysis for that. We'll bring that back to you on October 6th for your comments and review. Once you review that, we'll incorporate your comments into the approval design that gets submitted to CCDC, City Council, and ACHD for their approval. And then again, we will take it out to the public with an open house on probably the week of November 1st. And then that all concludes and gets submitted, whoops, I forgot the week of, to design review for their approval. I just said the week of sometime, but it will be probably the final week of October. I think that's the 23rd or so. And so we'll submit it to the design review. That will wait for their comments as we kick off design development. And then we start getting into more of the technical drawings at that point. So any other questions about anything that we shared here? Schedule, process, information, anything?
Christine, this is Karen Gallagher, City of Boise. So, really appreciate seeing the city council listed on there for review, and we'll just have to coordinate on the information and those dates.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we
We
plan
just-
on putting together a memo and getting that over to you guys in support of the material that we plan to present a week prior to those council dates. So we'll definitely be in coordination.
Yeah, and it might actually be a little bit more than a week. So yeah,
Okay.
we'll just need to coordinate on that, Amy, and just
Okay.
what work sessions. Hopefully they're available that time too. So just we'll figure out the best we can do there.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Anything else from anybody that they'd like to ask questions on before we wrap up, or comments? I know this was a lot of information presenting this go around, but I think it's important to really get those details on existing conditions so we know what space we're working in, and then we'll talk more detailed on the opportunities and design alternatives next session.
It gives us a little bit more time next time to really dive into those without having to go through the site analysis too.
And have you already sent out calendar invites to the group for the next one, Christine? Or
I haven't. I will do that right after this.
Okay, great. Well, if there's nothing else,
Amy,
yes.
Karen again. So
Yes.
just curious. I joined a little late, but I am curious on the bike lane. So is one of the alternatives to look at having it next to the curb and having the parking floating?
Let Christine answer that.
Yeah, we're looking at lots of different types of bike lane configurations. I know right now you have a designated bike lane. And so what we had kind of gone over earlier, we are looking at elements. I think this is kind of what you were talking about, Karen, is this kind of raised bike lane that is separated. So we are looking at this typology, also cycle tracks and designated bike lanes. So we'll have these as key points as we move forward. But yeah, we're really looking at how do we separate kind of these modes of transportation for safety.
Oh, great. Yeah, and you're recording the meeting, so I'll just go back and watch the rest of that so I can get up to speed. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Any other comments? Amy, I'm trying to learn to sit with like silence and be okay with that.
A good
What
skill.
people think.
Well, I am going to be cognizant of everyone's time, and you can feel free to email myself if you have any questions or comments in between the next meeting. But like Christine said, we are aiming to set up another meeting September 8th. So stay tuned and look for an invitation coming your way. And then also next week, we'll be likely sending out the vision report for your guys' review and any comments that need to be incorporated. But thank you for everyone's time today.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.